After weeks of successful Ukrainian strikes against the Russian oil infrastructure, Russia has decided to strike back, and strike back it did hard. At the same time, there are disturbing news from the United States, which we'll talk about as well in this video. This airstrike has been one of the biggest in the latest month, and the Russians say themselves this is retaliation for the Ukrainian strikes against the Russian oil infrastructure. The Russian Ministry of Defense is saying they struck the energy infrastructure, they struck the defense industry, they struck railway hubs, arsenals, and deployment areas. According to the Ukrainians, 63 Shahid drones were used, 12 Iskander-M. You see the numbers that they claim to have shot down. They claim to have shot down 55 of the 63 Shahid. They were shot at with 12 Iskander-M. 0 of them were intercepted. They claim that out of 40 KH-101 or KH-555, they shot down 35, so 35 out of 40. 0 out of 5 KH-22. 0 out of 7 KH-47M Kinshal ballistic missiles, and they say they shot down both KH-59 cruise missiles that were used against them. Out of the 22 S-300 and S-400 missiles that are basically that are actually surface-to-air missiles, but are being used by the Russians as in ground-to-ground usage as a ballistic missile, the Ukrainians have not been able to shoot down a single one. The result of this strike and the result of the many cruise missiles and ballistic missiles that made it through are damages all over Ukraine. In Kharkiv, electricity has gone completely out. There's a complete blackout. Even the air raid sirens do not work anymore. Water and heating has also collapsed. At the same time, the electricity supply for the power plant in Zaporizhzhia, in Enerhodar, the nuclear power plant in Zaporizhzhia, had failed, but meanwhile the Ukrainian technicians have managed to re-establish power supply. This is important, as while the nuclear power plant is shut down, it still needs active cooling to prevent a meltdown of the fuel rods. For that, they obviously need electricity, and a connection to the electricity grid is mandatory in this context. At the same time, the Dnipro power plant has been hit 8 times. The dam itself is not in danger of breaking, though, according to the Ukrainians. And we see here one of the images. The power plant itself, the hydroelectric power station 2, is mostly destroyed, according to the Ukrainians. They are still somewhat unclear if parts of it at least will be able to produce electricity again, but it seems like it's mostly taken out of commission, and probably for the long term, as a lot of equipment will have to be replaced at the same time. The situation there also led a strike. There's right under the ridge of the dam, there's a road where damage was also occurring. We see a trolley bus here being hit, and supposedly at least one victim happened. At least one person died in context of that strike. We see further damage and fires here in the installations. At the same time, we see a video showing the strikes here, and we can see the detonations in the background. The hits that are being reported, and once more we see Russian cruise missiles having adapted to the new environment, where a lot of them were initially shot down by the Ukrainians with manpads, so infrared guided shoulder fired surface to air missiles. Now the Russians have modified their cruise missiles that they deploy flares to prevent them from being hit, and you can see them here in that video how the flares are being deployed right before the cruise missile hits the electric power plant as well. The interesting here is we also have an interesting graphics here that shows us how the attacks happened and which targets they hit, and what you can see here visibly well displayed is the routes of those attacks as soon as the weapons that were used were identified. This shows how important reconnaissance is in this context, as those routes that make turns, the picture that shows that the routes aren't perfectly straight is a clear sign that the Russian mission planning is trying to avoid identified air defense stations to increase the effectiveness of their airstrikes. There we can see it, and at the same time, those where they expect them to be less likely being shot down, like the Kinshal and the Iskander, they are going in a straight line, but the cruise missiles are here you see the red, the cruise missiles, you see them flying turns, and you see the Shahid flying turns as well. So this is an illustration of how the mission planning is important. And this also shows that why those attacks usually take several days to be implemented, as the mission planning as shown here on the picture takes quite a lot of time to be properly done. At the same time, there's somewhat disturbing news from the Financial Times. According to them, the US urged the Ukrainian side to stop their attacks on the oil infrastructure out of fear of retaliation, but also for domestic US reasons. Here it says the US objection came as Biden faces a tough re-election battle this year, with petrol prices on the rise, increasing almost 15% this year to around $3.50 a gallon. Nothing terrifies a sitting American president more than a surge in pump prices during an election year, said Bob McNally, president of consultancy, and so on and so forth. This is obviously disturbing, as the retaliation strike by the Russians shows how effective those strikes are. The Russians have stopped exporting fuel products, depriving them of a source of influence and a source of hard currency that they need to finance their war. Domestic oil prices, domestic fuel prices in Russia are rising as well, clearly showing how effective the Ukrainian strikes against the Russian oil infrastructure are in a strategic sense. So in the long-term goal to win the war, they need to attack Russian sources of financing the war, as well as the sources that allow a convenient life for the Russian citizenry, at the same time to let them feel the results of the war and thus make them unhappy about the war itself. For that, the Ukrainian strikes against the oil infrastructure was of utmost importance, and as we can see here, if the Financial Times is right, the US tried to influence that, to stop that. One side is out of fear of retaliation, as we saw in the last 24 hours, but also for domestic US reasons, as the US is in an election year, and there obviously the oil prices will have an influence on the likelihood of the current president to be re-elected. That was already it from me for now. If you liked this video despite the topic, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment what you think about the current situation and the US aims to stop the Ukrainians to strike oil refineries. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting this channel. And that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.